Hi, I'm new here today, and so it's good to see you. I really want to just say before they're out of here, and Scott I think isn't feeling good today. He's not here, but Mike and Danny and everybody, of course, the office staff, they did such a great job. I know you've told me all that, and I said, actually somebody I think in one of the earlier said, who is this guy? I like the other guys better. So anyway, let's pray together. Lord, thank you that you are, every gift comes from you, every good and perfect gift, that you're good, and that you want that for us. And so help us today. Lord, we know we don't need a bunch more content in our life. Most of us here today, we have so much stuffed into our heads and so many things spinning around our heads and thoughts we can't shut down that it's hard for us to hear anything for 5 minutes, let alone for 25. So Lord, but you can speak. You can say something very personal to our lives, more than just word, but by spirit and truth. So we ask you to do that. We ask you to speak with spirit and with power, that it has that ring that we know it's just you, and we know that it's time now. So give us that today in Jesus' name, amen. Be seated if you would. Thank you. This is a little tongue-in-cheek because it hasn't been a picnic during the time I've been off, but I think I shared in the early service, I was talking to someone saying, yeah, I had this wreck and I had a head injury and had hurt my back pretty bad. And they said, oh yeah, I noticed that you were kind of off. Back last year, you just seemed like you were out of it. I didn't have the wreck until January, so I said, no, that was just the normal off. But the other part, that could be determined. It wasn't really an intellectual kind of thing. It was more of it was a different kind of injury. But a lot of you have asked, and I'm doing better, and good doctors and some good some stuff I'm still working on. So I'm good. I'm as good as I'm going to be today. How's that? Somebody said, well, I'm kind of staging back in, but I said I might go home today and say, what was I thinking? No, I really am. I actually was coming in for a staff meeting, and I thought, man, I'm glad I get to do this again. I wasn't sure how that was going to go. There's an old hymn, some of you remember it. It goes like this: how tedious and tasteless the hours when Jesus no longer I see. Sweet prospects, sweet birds, and sweet flowers have all lost their sweetness to me. The midsummer sun shines but dim. The fields strive in vain to look gay. But when I am happy in Him, December's as pleasant as May. It's really talking about, the writer was someone who really struggled with finding a life in God that was a happy life. Some of his issues may have been more than just, maybe there were some resources that he didn't have, but the song goes on to say, content with beholding his face, my all to his pleasure resign. No changes in seasons or place can make any change in my mind. While touched with a sense of his love, a palace, a toy would appear, and prisons would palaces prove, if Jesus would dwell with me there. Lord, if indeed I am thine, if I am thy, if thou art my son and my song, why do I languish and pine? And why are my winters so long? Oh, blow these dark clouds from my sky, thy soul cheering presence restore, or take me with thee up on high, where winters and clouds are no more. Okay, this song's kind of call and response. So that means I call and you respond. Well, that means you can't just watch the band, okay? You got to actually, it's part of the song. I am walking these dark valleys, trying to find my way back home. Everywhere I lay my head, I feel so cold and all alone. Never had a word to say, but I just kept talking on and on. I never had a verse to sing, till I found it in your song. When I reached the mountain top, I was amazed at what I found. Each way from side to side, there were mountains all around. Looking for a grown-up soul to teach me how to be a child. Like a boulder breaking flower, small and worthless, meek and mild. I'm walking these dark valleys, trying to find a place called home. Everywhere I lay my head, I felt so cold and all alone. I'm looking for a grown-up soul to teach me how to be a child. Like a boulder breaking wildflower, small and worthless, meek and mild, small and worthless like a child. Jesus said, you can't even see the kingdom, let alone get in, until you are changed, you're converted and become like children. He wasn't talking about infant baptism or some kind of rite you do for your child. He was talking about you coming to an intentional, cultivated view of the life that is empowered by the Spirit of God to not be childish, not be big boys with big toys, but to be childlike. A lot of what we're going to talk about will, in one way or the other, embrace that. I want to find a grown-up soul to teach me how to be a child. You know, when you're walking in dark places in life, some of you are there right now, and some of you have been there. Some of you are not even sure. It's so dark, you're not even sure where you are. But there is a good thing. You can gain some perspective. You know, I'm kind of decided I'm going to change the way I talk about some things. And here's why. You ever said, hey, I learned something, and then you were talking about how you learned it, and then 5 years later you realize you had no idea what you were talking about? You ever had that experience? Yeah, me neither. Anyway, no, what I'm saying is I have had that experience a lot where I realize, I say, oh, I've arrived at this point where I have this figured out. And then I all of a sudden realize I knew a little tiny bit about it, but I didn't really get it at all. And so now I've kind of changed the idea from learning, even though I think learning is a good word still. But for my own sake, I'm more moving into the perspective that I'm setting my bar a little bit more realistic. I think I'm becoming more aware of things rather than saying, it's absolutely, I got this figured out. I think as we go through life, this is what we do. We don't get things totally figured out. Only God does that. He's the only all-knowing being. But you and I can become more aware. You know, some people never do. I mean, you hear people say, well, you live and learn. Well, I want to tell you, my experience teaches me you live and don't learn for a lot of people. There's a lot of don't learn out there going on. But it is possible that you can really, maybe all the times you've gone through things and had things happen in your life, it's possible that you're at a point in your life where this could be different, where the suffering has come in your life. And you begin to become aware of some things. Did you know that when things get pulled away from you, you know what I'm talking about. It could be relationships. And not necessarily that the relationship is not there, but it's just not what you thought it was going to be, right? You had this mindset. You know, some of you that have little kids, just put this in the bank, okay? But after you've had kids for a long time, you figure out right away, don't you? You figure out that your little plan for them and your agenda and all your expectations of them, that's gone, man. I mean, it may not be, but if you don't at some point begin to recognize this, it's going to be, just buckle up is all I'm trying to tell you. Don't get me wrong. See, pray for them, give them good direction and all this, but a lot of times when things get pulled away, things are not like you expected. Relationships, your marriage, this didn't pan out like I thought it would. It could be your job. You have your job, you liked your job, you wanted to do this, and then it hasn't worked out or maybe you're just exhausted from it. Or your health. You know, we all think we're going to be, when you're 20, what do you think? You're going to be 20 forever, right? Well, it doesn't work out. And there could be places you think, oh, this place is, even places I went up to, I took some of Sue's family up. I took them up to Mount St. Helens. And, you know, you think of these places it's a mountain, really. I mean, what could happen? You go up there and even it's not what you thought. It's gone. I mean, it's beautiful and awesome. And I have grown to have a different appreciation. But what I'm saying is, you have these things that you think about. When you lose something, when something is pulled away, you realize oftentimes that you, without knowing it, you began to build your happiness on sand, right? You began to build your happiness on something that can't happen. Can't be, you can't do it that way. And some of you have suffered through enough in your lives. You've lived long enough, or you've suffered enough to begin to see that most, this is true. I mean, some of you have suffered way more than I. I mean, I've had these, I feel like sometimes when, I never like to get into dueling symptoms, right? You don't want to do that. Well, you think you got problems, I got these, let me show you my scan, I don't want to do that. But a lot of you have suffered a lot more than I have, for sure. You have sickness, maybe pain. You've been through the suffering of pain or injury or loss, death of your husband or your wife, or maybe one of your kids or your grandkids or a close friend, or all of those. I meet people that have been through multitudes of losses. Maybe it was a career and it just ended abruptly or didn't end well. Or maybe you have teenagers. There's a certain type of suffering that goes with that. It's not their fault. They're just trying to become adults, okay? Don't blame them. We get weirded out because it caught up, it snuck up on us, right? They were just cute little kids, and now this, okay? Or sometimes along with that, you have the future. I can remember we thought our kids, we would mix in this and throw in a little bit of this, or toss this book in and stir it, and they're going to come out like this. I'm glad they didn't, but the reality is, if you make your happiness contingent on your kid's future, maybe it's money. You've lost enough money. You've dealt with these issues, or maybe it's a loss of security, or maybe it's mental health. Not everybody feels great every day. Some people struggle, and if you've not struggled with some kind of mental health issue, with anxiety or depression or something like that, you really don't, you just don't understand it. And don't prognosticate on this when you don't have the background to do it. I've tried to learn to not do that. But out of all these things, out of these losses, if you try, and it's not guaranteed, you can gain some awareness that comes from loss. Because you are forced by pain. Pain, you know what they say, change happens when the pain of staying where you are is worse than the fear of going forward. There's some truth to it. But when you're forced by pain or circumstances to face the illusions of your expectations, then you're beginning to get somewhere. Some people just live in denial. They just act like it's not going on, or they just continue to deal with it a different way. But it's funny how how people are. Like, I meet people and I was talking to some young people, and I was saying, how when you build your life on another relationship, you're young and you think, I could never live without them. I just couldn't imagine a life without them. And I was asking these young people because I knew they'd been. Have you guys ever been through has anybody here been through a big breakup? Huge breakup? Now, I know this isn't true for everybody, but these young people I was asking, I said, you remember a few years ago when you had that breakup with so-and-so and you thought you could never live without them? And they go, who? Did you know what? There are billions of people in the world that you don't know that you're living without. And they're happy. They're fine. But we get this in our head. I have people say to me, when you go through rejection, you could do two things. You can immediately get online and try and find somebody else. Immediately begin the search. Or you could, maybe not the first time, the second time, and the fifth time, You could say, why am I so incapable of being alone? That's awareness, see? That's moving from just being in a tough situation into awareness. Now, you could not do that and just plunge into another relationship, which later will most certainly provide you with another opportunity. Or at least likely. Maybe you're going to be, some of you are just blessed. You just hit the jackpot. That's true, but not everybody. I am, but not everybody. My wife's here, and I needed to say it. Make sure I said that. I don't want to leave any doubt in your mind how I felt about that. Okay. But what can happen with loss, and what can happen with the awareness of loss, is you can gain out of that the awareness of the conditions that you've created in your life. You know what I've discovered some? I haven't. I have not got this figured out. I'm just working on it. But you can, if you decide to, become aware that when you get stripped back enough, you will feel and begin to see that you set conditions for your happiness that are not from God at all. They're just made up in your head. Maybe you got them out of a book. Maybe some preacher told you that. Maybe I told you. But you can, in loss, you begin to gain the awareness that you have set up your happiness on something that wasn't from God. These conditions must be what happens to you when you get these in your life. You cling to these things. You have to maintain them. You don't even mean to. You respond like this. You have to maintain them. You hold on to them. You begin to cling to one thing or a person or another, a person or a thing or a dream or an objective or a plan, and you just hold on to it for dear life. As a matter of fact, here's where almost all unhappiness comes from. Now, you could say, well, I thought sin brought unhappiness. It does. This is part of it. When you begin to look for things in your life that only God can give you, you're guaranteed to be unhappy. And this is where it comes, because you've hold on, I've got to have this person in my life, I got to have this thing, I've got to have that. And then what happens when you have a relationship like this that you're clinging to, I've got to have this person to be happy in my life. What begins to happen immediately? What's the next thing? There's a bunch of next things, but possibly what? Possibly. Well, you could be disappointed. That's no question about that. But fear, right? What if I lose him? What if something happens to him? What if something happens to my child? What if something happens to this? Worry, anxiety, or somebody threatens what you want, your thing, or this person in your life, and it threatens the relationship, and then what do you do? What do you do then? How do you feel? Happy? You say, oh, I feel so happy about that. You feel anger. You feel fear, jealousy, envy, all this stuff that just comes right up out of the inner life. You're in turmoil. This is, by the way, this is how we live. As a matter of fact, what will happen a lot of times is in the midst of these moments in our life, you begin to think these must be defended and neurotically controlled. That's what we do. And then we make all kinds of excuses, how it's in their best interest or how it's in our best. That's good for the world, whatever. We could come up with anything. Don't get me wrong. I've not got this all figured out. But meanwhile, what we're doing is we're setting up these conditions for our happiness. We believe the lie, really, that to be happy, I must have ... You just fill in the blank. And so you keep on trying to rearrange the universe to the conditions that you have come to believe. You just believe them. They're just a belief that you have. They're not really real, that are essential for your happiness. And by the way, you'll have all kinds of people around you say, oh yeah, I would feel the same way. Oh, for sure, totally. By the way, now we live in an age where you can get a majority any day of the week. Just turn on your phone. You'll find somebody that'll agree with you and relate to you, and you know, a million hits on why you're right. That wasn't in my notes. I just added that. No charge. Why do we do this? What is this? What is this? What's driving this? You know what I think? We are wired to pursue happiness. We just are. I know you're saying, I don't know. You're going to have to convince me. That's okay. And by the way, you don't have to, don't just take my word for it. You can deal with this. We can talk about this. But what I'm saying to you is we are wired to pursue happiness. You see, loss can cause you to gain some awareness. And the awareness can cause you to begin to see that you've set up some conditions that are not from God. They're just in your mind. And then you can begin to gain an awareness of your real desire for happiness. Let me just ask you a question. Please don't answer it. I don't have time to answer all these. Or I don't want this to turn into, are you truly happy? No, really. Just don't answer it out loud. Are you truly happy? Are you kind of like what they say in rehab? Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? Or like one old comic said, I'm tired of the rat race because the rats are always winning. I think there's some truth to that. You know, people say it. They don't say, oh, I just want to be happy. Sometimes they say that. But people say it in different ways. They use code. They say stuff like this, man, I just want my life to be simpler. Or people say, oh, I just need a break. Or they say, man, what I would give for some peace. I hear this from Christian people. And what are they saying? You know, deep down, I really want to be happy because we are wired for happiness. That's where we got started. I mean, let's talk about it. Beginning, God, ex nihilo, calls the universe into existence with a word. Beautiful, awesome. Creates plants and animals and the seas and the fish, and everything he says is what? What's he say? Good. It's great. It's not just, I mean, when God says something is good, folks, you don't even know. You know, you're just like living in a garbage can compared to that, right? But it's good. It's been unmessed up. It puts man in the world, our ancestors. It's good. What did they call it? Paradise, right? That's pretty good. I mean, I think I stayed at some place. It was called Paradise. It wasn't paradise. It was a crummy hotel. What I'm saying to you, but that was paradise. Perfect relationship between man and creation and nature, living in harmony with that. They were the under rulers, take care of what God had given them. But they weren't happy, right? Sin entered the picture. They chose to not be happy. They thought, they were deceived into thinking that they needed more, they needed to take more, they didn't want any limits. We know the results. But, you know, there's the other thing. You know, what's heaven all about? What do you think heaven's like? What's that for? I mean, there's all kinds of arguments people have and discussions about heaven. They got addresses and stuff. But the reality is, why do you want to go to heaven? What's heaven offer? It offers happiness, folks. That's the whole thing, isn't it? What do you want to go to heaven? So you can work in God's factory? I mean, what's that all about? I mean, it doesn't even say what eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor no one's ever expressed how great it is what God has for us. It's not wrong for you to want to be happy. How you define it might be a problem. As a matter of fact, it's actually intuitive throughout human history, even in our own country's founding. The founders recognize it. They said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As a matter of fact, that phrase Jefferson took from an earlier philosopher named John Locke. And when John Locke wrote it, he said the pursuit of property. And by the way, there's some of you that still have those two mixed up. Property and happiness aren't necessarily the same thing. But the founders thought, that's not quite right. We got to tweak it. We got to broaden it. Happiness. I believe it's a God-given desire to want to be happy. Even Jesus preached it. I mean, Jesus understood that we are all attracted to something called the blessedness. You know those passages in the Beatitudes where he said, blessed is this, blessed is that, blessed is, you're attracted to that. He was saying, hey, if you want to have blessedness, realize this. Blessedness comes from a word that really translates the most genuine form of happiness. But it doesn't have anything to do with stuff. And it doesn't have anything to do with the kind of things that you think. As a matter of fact, Matthew says, and he began to teach them. Happy are those who know they're spiritually poor. This is a little different translation so you can get it. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Happy are those who mourn, for God will comfort them. And happy are those who are humble, and they will receive what God has promised. And happy are those whose greatest desire is to do what God requires. God will satisfy them fully. Happy are those who are merciful to others. God will be merciful to them. And happy are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Happy are those who work for peace. God will call them his children. And happy are those who are persecuted. Wait a minute. I thought, that doesn't sound very happy. I mean, people don't like me. People are mean to me. Happy are those who are persecuted because of what God requires. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. Happy are you when people insult you and persecute you and tell all kinds of evil lies about you because you are not my followers. You are my followers. Be happy and glad, for great reward is kept for you in heaven. This is how the prophets lived before you were persecuted. Before you were persecuted. You know what he's saying here? There's some dimension of your life that you've got to get into in order to experience this blessedness. But it doesn't have anything to do with having everybody like you and you having all the religious freedom that you want and you having all the stuff that you think you need. You know, the Old Testament talks about it too. The preacher in Ecclesiastes says on a fundamental level, on a basic fundamental level, being happy is a gift from God. Look at Ecclesiastes says, I know that there is nothing better for men than to be what? Than to be happy and do good while they live. That everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. You know, I thought that could have been written by a Baptist. You know, it almost has fried chicken included, you know. It's like, yeah, you can be happy. You can have a big dinner and stuff. Live your life simply. Be happy. This word, he's really saying, even in the simplest terms, what that song said, and prisons would palaces prove if Jesus would dwell with me there. He's talking about blissfulness, blessedness, really deeply happy no matter what. And this is not automatic. You're not going to get there automatically. As a matter of fact, the world and the cultures that we live in, they cultivate unhappiness. They run on unhappiness. How do they get you to buy stuff? You know, there's 150 container ships off the coast of LA waiting to unload the stuff that is supposed to make you happy. That happens by created need. I have to create a need in your life for you to think, ooh, I got to have it. You know what I'm talking about. Because we attach our happiness to things. Or we live with the controlling lie that those around us are somehow responsible for our happiness. As a matter of fact, it's easy to do. I know I've done it. We burden our children or our spouses with the insane expectation that they must keep us happy. If you don't do what I want, I'm going to be unhappy. Well, that's a double downer, isn't it? They're unhappy, and you're going to be unhappy because they're putting the responsibility for their happiness on you. You want to get even, just be happy. It's not the best motive, but it is one. Oh. Isn't that something how we do this? We make ourselves miserable trying to become the source of other people's happiness when we can never, ever do it. Even if we mean to, even if we do our best, even no matter what. We can't keep our promises. We may die. And we make other people miserable, attaching our needs on them that they've got to keep us happy. They're responsible. This happens in marriage all the time. It creates most of the marital misery. Do it to your, keep us happy. My wife does, if my wife did this, then I'd be happy. No, you wouldn't. You're just going to come up with something else. If my husband was a spiritual leader, then I'd be happy. No, you wouldn't. Because then you'd have to actually listen to him. And right now, he doesn't even pay attention. He's just watching TV. If my kids did this, if I found the perfect church, and the church was like this, and they just, it was just a hug fest, then I'd be happy. No, you'd be creeped out, and you'd be using a lot of hand sanitizer. You know you would. It's not because it's wrong to want to be happy. They just can't do it. And you can't do it. How selfish is it of me to expect you to make me happy? To think, oh, great. You're my next source of happiness. Well, that's not a good line, is it? All it does is produce frustration, pain. And what can happen in pain and frustration is it can bring you to an awareness of what true happiness really is. I know you're saying, man, are you going to get to this? I know, I'm just setting this up, okay? Because true happiness is something that is quite different than what we've been led to believe. Paul learned the secret of happiness. He called happiness by another name, but we would recognize it as exactly the same thing. So think about this, being content. What does it mean to be, what is contentment? All of us, whether we really understood that or not, being content is the idea that everything's fine. I'm not worried. I'm not angry. I'm not demanding. I don't know about you, but when you're really happy for whatever reason, that's what you feel like, contentment. That's real happiness. Think about the last time you were truly happy when you take that term contentment as what it really means. The idea that all is well. I was sitting before the Lord one day, and the Lord asked me that question. Well, when was the last time you were really happy? And I've had many moments where I've been really happy, but I was telling Sue about this. I said, I remembered I had this moment that we were just married. We'd been married maybe not a long time, and we were up in the mountains up at Spirit Lake, and it was 2 feet of beautiful powder snow. It was nighttime, and the moon was out. It was a beautiful night, sparkling. We had some friends there. And I don't remember anything more than just the feeling of that moment was so, and God reminded me of it, that I was so content. And I began to tell her, and I said, well, we barely had jobs. We were living in a crummy apartment. We barely had a car that ran. We were staying at my dad's place. It wasn't even a place. We had no resources for that. And I just remember being so content. Now and here's what Sue said. Well, you're right about all that stuff, but there was this other thing. We didn't have any kids either. We didn't have a mortgage. We didn't have any we didn't have any credit. We didn't have a house to clean the gutters on, and all that. You get my point? It's not that those things are wrong or bad, but you see how you attach things on? Your life becomes very different. Paul said, not that I speak from want, but I've learned to be content with whatever circumstances I am. He learned it. He didn't just get it one day, like, he got saved and boom, now he's content. No. It won't happen without intention. You will go on changing conditions, changing relationships, changing stuff, inflicting the world and others with your demands to make you happy, to keep you happy. Paul said in 1 Timothy, he said, but godliness with contentment is great gain. That is bank, he says. More than any rich person can ever have. This is more. For we brought nothing into the world, and we could take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Did you know that the only thing in this world that will ever bring you to a place of happiness, you can't carry out of this world? You don't have it in your garage. It isn't in your family. It's nobody and no thing. Having food and clothing, or some say shelter, I'm content. Are you content with that? Well, theoretically, I'm content with that. I find that I adjust to first class really well. Right? Don't you? But the fact is, you ever wondered, some of you have traveled around the world and you say, I went to this place, these people had nothing. They just have nothing, but they're the happiest people I've ever met. It's not a coincidence. I'm not saying that it's wrong to have things. It's just what we have to have a new awareness about this. We'll talk more, but happiness in the Bible is not about fun or thrills or excitement, but it's about contentment. And by the way, did you know what all religions promise? They promise happiness. They do. They all do. I mean, who's going to go to a church? Come to this church, it's a bummer. The church where you can be, some of them really are that in practice. Show up, they're going to flog the sheep. You know what I'm saying? I've been a flogger at one point in my life. But what I'm saying is, look, folks, all the mistakes I've made, I don't know that I made all of them, but I've made a lot of them. All religions promise happiness and supposedly contentment, tranquility. But how many truly happy people do you really know? Really, you know them well enough to say that person is genuinely content, peaceful, happy. And think about the last time you were truly happy. I think last week would have been my 38th year being in Toledo, okay? And you know, I've spent a lot of time listening to people. I've spent a lot of time listening to all different types of people, but a lot of religious people. And I would tell you, by a lot, religious people are often the most unhappy people I've ever met. You say, well, can we close the service now? I'm getting out of here. I'm going down to the Presbyterian. Maybe they got a better deal. Maybe, but I doubt it. I'm just telling you. And I wonder, why is that? And here's why I think. You showed up looking for happiness. Really, you couldn't put it that way. But what we end up doing is it doesn't end up being delivered. And so what happens is preachers and other people, they kind of, well, I know we're kind of we're back ordered on happiness. So we'll give you some other stuff. How about activity? I'll give you a bunch of that. We got a warehouse full of that stuff. How about programs? We got those are on sale this week. We got disciplines. You'll never run out of these. We got disciplines galore. Our information. We got studies upon studies upon studies. We can jam your brain full of so much data. You'll never run out of stuff to be confused about. I've done all that stuff. I mean, I spent 9 years in higher education. I crammed 7 into 9. I was not a great academic. I enjoyed the experience, but what I'm trying to tell you, I spent all my time with people that were way smarter than me. Do you realize how discouraging that can be? And you know, languages and theology and all that stuff. And what I'm trying to say is this. I've done all that stuff. I've sometimes perpetrated that on others, sadly. And often we do it by justifying our unhappiness with strange redefinitions and serious talk about holiness or pretend, giddiness that turns, our relationship with God into either this fakey thing that we're like, oh, praise the Lord, hallelujah, glory to God, it gets any better, I'll be translated, or into something like, like something between an aerobics class and a hootenanny. I mean, really. That's not what the Bible's talking about here. And so you get disappointed and you think, well, I guess this is as good as it gets. I'm just going to be as obedient as I can, and I'm just going to keep all this stuff, keep me busy, and maybe one of these days I'll get lucky. Or God will hit me, or like Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval theologian, spent his whole life studying theology and language and Latin and Greek and the Aramaic, and he wrote the Magnus Opus Theologian. And then the last 7 years of his life, he just put it down. He had an encounter with God. And then he went silent. And later he said, I learned more in those years than I did in my 60 years of study. Because he encountered God and what God really offered instead of concepts and constructs. You see, we get disappointed, but deep down, even religious people still want to be happy. They pursue it. I mean, let's do this. Humor me for a minute. I know I'm bad shape here. Okay, I'll make this quick. Why do people come to church? Not you, of course, because you are you. But people you know. I mean, not great spiritual giants like us. But why did not the lessers, just other people come to church? Why do people go to church? All over America right now, there's millions of people going to church. Why? Okay, why? 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 To what? To get closer to God. But why? Okay, salvation, right? Why do they want to be saved? Okay, yeah, that fear of the alternative, some people say that. But I would say most people, it's not just a fear thing. Why do they want to go? They want salvation so they can be forgiven. That would be better, right? So that they can go to heaven. Why do you want to go to heaven? That's it? Look, your section's over here for the people with singed clothes. You just barely got in. Just be happy with what you got, sis. Is that how it works? Is that why you want to go to heaven? Look, it's the only alternative. It was hell or here, so here I am. Is that how this works? You know, like, yeah, I got, wow, sheesh. I mean, I went to the portal, and these were the options. I asked for an upgrade, but they said this is it. Okay, is that what it is? Why do you want to go to heaven, really, honestly? You want to be happy, folks. Don't you? I mean, isn't that what it says? The great verse in the end of the Bible, it says, and he himself will wipe away every tear. All those losses, your mom, your dad, your child, your friend, your dreams, your health, your fortune, your empire, whatever that was. All tears. Your reputation, all tears. But one day, in heaven, he's going to come by, and he himself, it says, he himself will wipe away every tear. I don't know about you, but no tears sounds like happy. It's okay to be happy. Don't be this sadly disappointed evangelical that spends all their time coming up with reasons why you're miserable. It's okay to be happy. It's okay to pursue happiness. It's okay to not necessarily be there yet. It's okay to be on a journey, but don't confuse it with excitement or thrills. I mean, we live in a society that has an industry built around keeping everybody thrilled and calling it happiness. The happiness of the Bible is not that. And by the way, look, folks, I mean, maybe it's just me at the point in my life, but that stuff just sounds like it's going to wear me out. I mean, honestly, I'm just like, really, I'm about thrilled out. And here's how it works. People get all charged up for their trip, and they're going to go off to the great whatever, and it's the fantasy life, and it's so great, and then you get thrilled, and then you go, if you really get there, you get thrilled, and then you're there for a while, and then you got to come back to your boring real life. That isn't what the Bible's describing. Real happiness is good. The deep daily contentment, it was the good of creation. It wasn't some big show. To glorify God, the Bible says, the great reformers said, the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy God forever, starting right now. So are you tired of miserable religion? Because I am. I really am. And you know what? I just wanted to break it to you. This will be good news for you. God's tired of it too. You remember when Jesus came? The people were way more religious than you guys. You guys are slackers. I mean, they went to the synagogue all the time. They had feasts all the time, go to the temple and sacrifices. They had rules about everything. I mean, whether you could eat an egg that was laid on a certain day, how many feet you could walk. I mean, all these expectations, everybody watching each other, to make sure their clothing. And a lot of it wasn't really from God at all. It was just traditions, kind of like the ones we get. And it was just crushing weight of religion on people's backs. And then Jesus comes along and he says, hey, all you that the crushing weight on you, come to me. All you who are weary and heavy laden. That's what he's talking about. And I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your soul. You say, well, that isn't really what he meant. Oh, it is. That's exactly what he meant. That's why he went to the place of suffering. I mean, Jesus didn't just show up, didn't beam down like Star Trek. He didn't beam in, he was incarnated. He came into our experience. He had a physical body. He lived with us. He sweat. He walked in the dirt and sweat, and he laughed and he cried, and he had incredible joy because he knew it was all well, that no matter what, it was going to be fine because he was going to make sure of it. And he went to the place of suffering so we could have the certainty of a happy life forever. You say, really? Yeah, John 10:10. I came that you might have life and you might have it in all of its fullness, starting right now. Jesus said, foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man, he said joyfully, I don't have any of those problems. I don't have to worry about it. It's all taken care of. So are you tired of the neurotic, perfectionist religion of worry? That's what it is. The worries of the world, the deceitfulness of riches, choke out the truth. Are you worried about being worried about appearances and reputation? And, people say, you got to watch out for your witness. You know what I say these days? I said, look, if God was worried about his reputation, he sure wouldn't trust you with it. I mean, what would he be thinking? You want to know what the best witness is? It's not you jumping through the right, little loops and hoops and whatever. I mean, Jesus' reputation was shot. I mean, think about it. They were always on him about his reputation. Why are you hanging out with sinners? I mean, if you were a holy man, you'd know that girl is a street girl. You know what the best reputation builder for God is? The best witness for God? Well, let me remind you of one of our heroes in the Bible, David. Yeah, this guy was murdered, killed a guy who was super loyal to him. He didn't just kill somebody, he killed a guy who was so committed to him that it's just heart-wrenching to think about what he did to Uriah. And then he takes the guy's wife and commits adultery and then tries to cover it up. And I mean, and that didn't mean any of that was okay. Well, he's okay because God overlooked it. God didn't overlook it. He had long-term struggles. But here's how he finally got right with God, Psalm 51. You want to know what a great reputation-building life looks like from God? A witness for God? Here's what David's prayer was. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and sustain me with a willing spirit. What a prayer. Give me back the happiness and the joy that comes with a real relationship with you, and help me to have a steadfast spirit. Help me to be stable emotionally again. You know what that is? Help me to be a happy, joyful person and a stable person. And then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will be converted to you. Do you know one of the greatest witnesses, the greatest witness for the gospel is a happy, holy life? That's it. Half won't do. Jesus said, my joy I give to you. Well, where is it? In loss, you can become aware of this, and I'll close with this, that it's time, the time to be happy is right now. It's not, you don't have to, I'm not telling you to go get rid of something, renounce something. Whatever you renounce, you'll drag along behind you forever. You'll become the anti-something guy. What you need to do, you don't need to get something or get rid of anything. You just need to see. We'll talk more about that. You just need to become aware that these things cannot be the conditions on your happiness. Here's why. 2 Peter, his divine power has given us, listen, everything we need for life and godliness. Everything we need. Everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. He's good. He's given you everything you need. You don't need to get rid of it. You don't need to get it. You just need to be aware. More than learning, be aware. And here, let me just say this. You know something, folks? Not even God can make you happy unless you're willing to let him. Some of you are too spiritual to let God make you happy. You got this brain lock going on. So let's do this together if you want to. Over these next few weeks, next week we'll be talking about waking up. Week after that we talk about seeing, beginning to see, like Jesus said, to see with different kinds of eyes. I want to close with this because I want you to know that right here, right now, right this place, you can start. You don't have, God is available to you. Let me put it like this. There was a group, quite a few years ago, off the coast of South America, there was a bunch of folks whose ship had sank and they were in a life raft, and they'd been floating for like 2 weeks. And you know, in a life raft, they have these tins of water. You know what I'm talking about? They were trying to ration it, and they were out. They'd been like taking a little cup, just eking out an existence, just barely getting by. It got so bad that they started fighting with each other. And then they just laid back and pretty much just given up, just ready to cook out there in the heat and die. But the whole time, the sad thing is, the whole time, they didn't realize that they were floating in the outflow of the mighty Amazon River. They were dying the whole time while around them was life. Everything around them was fresh water. All they had to do was bend over and have the faith to drink what was already there. It was theirs. They just had to, it was more than they could ever exhaust. They just had to trust what God had given them. Do you know there's an old hymn that goes, like a river glorious is God's perfect peace, overall victorious. God's grace like a river, fountains of mercy, oceans of love, rivers of grace. God's given a river of grace. It's forgiveness. It doesn't matter what you've done or who you've disappointed or whatever. It doesn't matter who's got expectations of you. God's forgiveness, not only will he take away your guilt, but he'll remove your shame. His acceptance is absolutely without qualification. Security, he'll never let you go. Everything you need, everything you need for life and godliness. So good. No wonder it's called the gospel. And so in the Lord's Supper, we set aside a tradition to remember why we have this hope. Why you don't have to attach your happiness to other people, other things, other agendas. I'll finally be happy if I could just retire. I'd finally be happy if I could just go back to work now that I retired. I'll finally be happy when I get divorced. I'll finally be happy when I marry. I'll finally be happy when I get divorced again. And blah, 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 blah. I'm not arguing whether or not you ought to retire, you ought to work, or what you ought to do. It's just I'm just telling you, you can't look to it. You can't make your happiness contingent. I'm going to tell you, there's one person who is the spring of grace. It's Jesus. Now I haven't got this all figured out, but we can walk together. And so we remember, this is our hope, not these things that are just symbols. This is just a cup and bread. But these symbols remind us to remember that the center of our lives is this relationship with him. And so you may be ready to do that, to come back to that and say, I got to cut this stuff loose. We'll learn how to do that more and more. This is not quick. And when you begin to say, I don't need these people and that thing in order to be happy, it's terrifying, but it's also liberating. And by the way, I'm going to tell you, you live long enough, you're going to do it anyway. You just won't do it you won't get to do it voluntarily. In just a moment, we're going to take our offering, and I just want to say this before we do that. There's some things that you could help us with. We could pray for you, and maybe some steps that you could take as you get ready to take the offering. One of the things that you give is your response, and maybe you have a prayer need, and we do pray for these every week. We meet together. There's some responses to this message that go like this. One, I want to pursue happiness, the happiness God promises. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. What is that? What does that mean? What does the Bible really teach about that? Pray, I will have the faith to be happy now. You know, that's the thing. I just want to remind you one thing. If you didn't get anything else out of what I said, you have permission to be happy. You say, well, couldn't you just said that and we could have just left then? That probably might have been an option, okay? But you do. Now, this is a journey. You say, well, that's insensitive. You don't know what I'm going through. I'm not in any way minimizing the pain you're in. But I believe God works all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose, that he can even use those difficult, painful things to help us to have an awareness that we need to have. And then I want to learn to be content with Christ. And then pray, I will stop clinging to people and to things for my happiness. I'm not saying you don't need to love people. I'm saying the exact opposite. Clinging to people is not loving people. It's the opposite. But we get wired backwards, and then our fan starts to spin the wrong way. And so what I'm trying to tell you is, in a moment, we're going to pick these up. So put your name on it, a way we can contact you, and we will pray for you. And if there's some way we can encourage you, we will. And then remember, next week we'll be talking about some things that will kind of add to this idea a little more.